This is how to assemble your Lego project. Earlier, I copied the large Lego Part Studio workspace into my own workspace documents. Then, in my Lego Sandbox, I created a new Part Studio, renamed it to match the assembly I'm going to create, and then I derived parts into this Part Studio from either my previous Part Studio in this same document or from my larger Part Studio in my Created by Me documents list. We can see I've got a number of things in here. I've got tires, rims, wheels, axle parts, windshield, slant pieces, and some axle bricks. The reason we want to use the derive feature and put them into this menu first is because it allows us to change the color of them without affecting their color in other documents. That is a key feature, that if you affect the color of an object without driving it into a new document first, you can affect the color in every instance of that part in any document it's used in. So it can be very dangerous if not doing correctly. So for example, this 1x10 axle brick, I'm going to change the color of it before I use it. So I can say edit appearance, and let's make it a lighter gray so it's much easier to see and use in the document. Now I feel I'm ready to start my assembly. So you can either click on the assembly tab down below if you have one, or you can say right click and create assembly on the new element menu option in Onshape. I'm going to rename my assembly, so right click on the name and say rename. This is going to be Lego car. So it goes with the Part Studio I created earlier. Now I'm going to insert some parts in. I'm not going to bring in all my parts yet, because when you have too many parts, it gets a little difficult to move around. So I want to bring them in from the Lego Car Part Studio. Theoretically, you could click and bring in the entire studio since you know you're going to use all those parts. But they tend to get in the way if you have too many parts on your screen. The first thing I'm going to import is my 4x8 plate. And so you click on it, click to place it, and then you can go back to your insert menu and grab a few more things. And then I want the 1x10 axle bricks. I'm going to want 2 of those, so I can click it and place it twice. I'm placing things away from my plate since I'll be using that to start the assembly. And then I'm going to want some axle pieces. I think I'll start with the pin axle smooth first, and I'll need 2 of those. I'll need a rim that they go with, so I'll need 2 of those, and those go with the extra large small tire, and so I'll need 2 of those. That should get me started. So now I have some of the parts to start my assembly. There's many ways to assemble parts in Legos. In real life, we tend to line up the pegs on top of each other and then snap them together. While also lining up the flat surfaces on the outside of the Legos. The simplest type of mate in Onshape that allows us to do this is what's called the planar mate. And it takes 3 planar mates to lock something into place and remove all degrees of freedom. So first I'm going to move my 4x8 plate out of the way a little bit, and then I'm going to fix it. so it doesn't move. Right click, fix. You have to have one fixed item, you can see it's fixed by the menu option here, to do an assembly easily. Now, I can drag each item I want to use near the fixed plate so I can see them in my screen better. So I'm going to show you how to do 3 planar mates first, and then I'll show you how to use the fasten mate, which is a much easier option. The planar mate allows for flat surfaces to be aligned on the same plane, and they can either be facing the same plane or facing the plane opposite each other. And so, for example, if I want to put this axle hole brick on the bottom of this plate, I want to line up the 2 outside surfaces. And so to do that, I'm going to roll up closely to the plate, hover over it, and I can see the exterior edge of the plate highlighted, and I see a little handle that shows up in the middle of the plate. That handle has a blue line, a green line, and a red line. The blue line is the Z-axis, green is Y, red is X. And I can click that. And once I clicked it, it highlights itself and shows up in my menu. Now when I click the outside surface of my Lego brick, and it really doesn't matter where my handle is because I'm using a planar mate. A planar mate lines up the X and Y axis, not the Z axis. So for example, I can click on any one corner or any handle as long as the side is highlighted correctly, and it snaps the 2 handles together. But all it really does is line the plates up, and I can see that by clicking Animate Degrees of Freedom. And I can see it will animate the degrees of freedom in any direction, but those 2 flat surfaces stay lined up. And so I like that, and so I'm going to say OK. I can then drag the parts apart if I want. I could rotate it, but it's unnecessary at the moment. Next, I want to line the front face of my plate with the front face of my brick. And so I'll basically do the same operation. I might want to orbit so I can see things a little bit better. Planar mate. I'll zoom in and hover over the flat surface of the edge of the plate and click it. And as long as that handle is somewhere on one of the 9 handle locations for that surface, it's fine. And then I'm going to zoom in down here, rotate a little bit, and click on the flat edge of the plate. Of the brick. Zoom out to see what it did. Again, I can animate to see my degrees of freedom. If I click Solve, it solves both assemblies that are already in play. So now it's lined up this planar mate here and this planar mate here. And I think that's what I want, so I'm going to click OK. Now I can click on this brick, and I can only move it up and down because I have this plane aligned and this plane aligned. So the last plane I want to align is the top of the Lego brick to the bottom of the Lego plate. So again, I'll do a planar mate. I want to make sure I get the bottom flat edge of my Lego plate. And again, it doesn't matter where the handle is on a planar mate. Clicked, highlighted it, orbit down. Then I'm going to click the top surface of the Lego brick, not the top of a peg. Click, and they snap together. You can now click play, and you can see that it says it has degrees of freedom in that direction, but it doesn't, because if I say solve, it's locked into place. If I needed to, I could possibly reorient my axis and spin the part around as needed if it's going in a different direction. If I said flip primary axis, that changes the direction of the Z-axis. Whereas reorient secondary axis Z stays the same, X and Y rotate. I click OK to secure it, and now it's fully locked into place. I cannot click and drag it. So it takes 3 planar mates to remove all the degrees of freedom from a part. However, that process is rather long. Onshape has a much faster process called the fasten mate. The fasten mate applies 3 planar mates at once. So I click the fasten mate, and I want to secure this brick underneath this plate just like we did before. And I can do this in a number of different ways. I can hover over this flat surface here, and this time I want to pay attention to my handle. I want to align this flat surface here with the flat surface on the other brick, and I just need to pay attention to what corner the handles are on for both objects. So for example, I'm going to hover over this flat surface on the front of my plate, go down and grab the very bottom corner handle of that flat surface. It's highlighted and selected. Now I want to think how that corner here orients to how I might line it up on this plate or this brick surface here. And I think that corner, once this brick is in place, will line up with this flat surface in this corner here. So I click it, and it snaps the two into place. Well, that's obviously oriented wrong, but let's see what options I have when flipping primary axis. I would definitely want it facing this direction. And we can see if I orient secondary axis, it's moving on the X, Y, and Z and flipping around. So I can rotate it in the direction I want eventually. If it didn't work, I could always delete the mate connector and choose a different spot to find the right one. If I say solve, it should lock it into place to visualize it, and then I can click OK, and it's locked into place. So that's much faster using a fastened mate because it does 3 planar mates, one on the X, one on the Y, and one on the Z. Next, I'm going to use the revolute mate to put the axle pins into the front of my car so I can put rims and wheels on them. The revolute mate is a lot like a fasten mate, except it only does alignment on 2 axes. So first I'm going to zoom in here, and I'm going to click some feature on the axle hole that I can think to line up with the pin. Let me drag it a little bit closer so you can see a little bit better. I just have to imagine which surface I want lined up. So I want the face of this surface in the center. Oops, wrong button. Revolute. The face of this surface at the center of that circle, lined up so that the plus part of this pin is sticking out, and the face of this pin is flush with the outside. So you may need to zoom in very close because I want this flush surface of the pin at its center point. So I'll click the center point to line up to the flush surface of the brick. If I reorient primary axis, it should flip it around. And so if I wanted it that way, I could orient it that way. Or if you click the wrong center point, you might be able to just flip it and it solves your problem. Reorienting your secondary axis will just basically spin your piece, and that doesn't do any good at the moment. So I'm going to say okay, because I like this alignment. And now I can see I can kind of spin the piece in the axle like you do on a real Lego. Now I can put parts on that. Drag a rim close by. And I'm going to do the same thing. Some of the Lego pieces are made for a little bit simpler assembly. This one in particular does not have the little cross symbol like this does, but it'll still work the same. Again, I want to use a revolute mate. And I want to do a revolute mate on the outside surface of my tire, or of the rim. So I hover over that first, get all my handles to show up, and then go grab the center point handle. And I want to line that up with the outside surface of the plus. You might need to zoom in so you can see the handles at the center point of it. And so I click both center points, and it's facing the direction I want. I don't need to flip it around. I can see my degrees of freedom showing me that it'll be able to rotate in this direction, and that's what I like. I say okay. Now I can click and drag the rim around the pin, and I don't care that the pin doesn't spin. It does spin independently. Theoretically, you could have used a fastened mate to lock the rim to the pin, and it would still work because we used a revolute mate on the pin to the axle brick. Now I'm going to bring my tire a little bit closer and use the fasten mate again to snap the tire to the rim because they don't need to move separately. So fasten mate. Again, I'm going to find some aspect of the rim I want to attach to some aspect of the tire. This is what gets a little bit more complicated. So again, I'm going to choose the center point of that flat surface on the exterior of the rim. And then on the tire, if I roll on any round object, it gives me its center point. Well, I want the flat surface of that rim to line up with the inside surface of this tire. So I'm going to click that circle so that the two line up, and I can kind of see it did what I wanted it to do. If you click the wrong one, just remove it out of the mate connector menu and try selecting something different. If I click play, it has no degrees of freedom because it's a fasten mate. And so I say okay. So now I can kind of click and drag my wheel and see that it spins. I don't care that it spins independently of the axle pin. That really is unimportant. Again, I'll do the same thing over here. Revolute mate. This time I'll click the inside circle of the brick axle, and I know that lines up with this inside circle on my pin. And now they're facing the other direction, so I'm going to flip it around so it's facing the right way. Animate my degrees of freedom, and it'll animate whatever object you click first. So it happens to animate the brick, even though we know the brick's locked in place in real life. I can say solve. And then, okay. And now I can see that my pin spins inside the axle hole. Put these two closer together. And if I wanted to, I could do a fasten on the rim first. To snap the two together. If I need to just flip the primary axis to get it going the right way, I could do that. Then I can go to a fasten mate on the center of my tire to the outside of the plus. Sometimes you need to hover off and then hover back on to grab the piece you want. There we go. Center of the plus. Snaps the two together. I can animate it. It doesn't animate because it's a fastened mate, but since the pin's on a revolute, it doesn't matter. If I say solve, it snaps the tire back into place, and I say okay. Now if I spin this one, of course it spins the axle too because I use fasten mates instead of revolute mates. that's how to assemble simple planer mates using the fasten mate and then using the revolute mate to attach wheels to your car. So the video doesn't get too long, I'll make a second video on how to do much more complicated assemblies, like putting a longer axle on the big tires I'm going to bring in, and then for assembling the windshield and other stuff.